Alright, how's it going, guys? Alright, so let's talk a little bit about these convex grinds and edges and the difference between that and something like a hollow grind with a V-ground edge. So, actually, let's start with this. Now, when you have your standard edge like many knives have out there, you have your flats, and you have either a hollow grind or a flat grind, which this is a hollow grind in that case, and then all the way down at the tip of that you have your edge, which is typically a V-ground edge. So it might have a hollow grind edge, but typically you have a V-ground edge. So let's talk about that. Looking at a cross section, looking down the edge, you have your flats. You got your hollow ground edge, and then you got a V-grind. Finish that up. So we are looking down the knife, or at the knife, and that's kind of what you're looking at, which is very dramatic. It's obviously not that dramatic, but just for geometry purposes, this is how we're going to look at it. So you have this, you got your hollow ground, and then you got a separate angle. So keeping that in mind, these would take a different sharpening method. So obviously you guys know how to sharpen a knife, so I'm just going to kind of reinstate what we already know. So there's your stone or whatever, and you're kind of sharpening down your stone. So your V-ground edge is hitting the stone, and your V-ground edge is kind of doing this. It's laying flat against the stone. There's your flats, and you're just kind of bringing it down your stone to maintain that V-ground edge. So, keeping this in mind, we'll talk about how I sharpen my Rocksteads and the method behind those, and why it's completely different than this, why you can't maintain it this way. Now you can still use a flat surface like a stone, and as you've seen in my last video, like I used that ceramic stone, which was flat, obviously. You can't have a convex stone, but why you can use a stone, why you can still maintain a convex edge. So, starting off with the different grinds, which I want to clear up anyways. Here you got a Shinogi-Zukuri, which has two different bevels. You can see them right there. Which these do not go from 30 inclusive to 24 inclusive like the Hanzukuri, which I know that because you can see that this bevel right here does not change shape from going there to the tip, because if it did change shape, down here it wouldn't be as wide as up here at the tip. So, and what I mean by that is, say here is 30 inclusive, here would be 24. So you'd have a much steeper tip right there. Anyways, in contrast with that, you have your Hanzukuri, which does go from 30 inclusive at the bottom to 24. And I know that not only from obviously looking at it, but also from sharpening it. You can just feel the difference in angles if you got to sharpen it when you're hitting the apex. So, but this does not have the secondary bevel like the Shinogi-Zukuri does have. So you can see some of those scratches there from using it. But anyways, drawing these out, where the Rockstead logo is at being your flats, let's draw out Hanzukuri. So you'll have, focus. So you'll have your flats, and then you'll have a change of angles, and then you will go from your change of angles all the way down to the edge in a convex manner. And when I mean convex, I mean rounded, basically. So, in contrast with Shinogi-Zukuri, not only do you have your flats, a change of angles from your flats to this convex bevel, you have another change of angles that, bring you with another convex edge, as seen in here. You got your flats, convex bevel, another convex bevel. Simple enough. So, sharpening these brings me to my sandpaper method with a foam backer. So, if you were to try to use a method like this on something with a V-ground edge, you would do this. You got your foam backer, and then you'd be pressing your V-ground edge onto that foam backer. Now the problem with that is that foam backer is going to want to do this. It's going to want to give, and that is going to round out your V-ground edge, and it'll cause a lost sharpness, which is a problem. We want to keep our knife sharp. However, going with your flat medium with your Rockstead has this convex edge, and then it'll give in to the soft medium, and instead of giving and rounding your edge out, you're actually forming this apex, which is very fine at the tip. Even though you have these rounded edges, your soft medium is going to kind of conform around that and form a tangent once it's pushed on there, and naturally form this edge here that's right at the tip. So, with that said, that was my first method. If you saw my last video, I went from 2000 grit sandpaper to a ceramic stone back to 2000 grit sandpaper. So first, I used the 2000 grit sandpaper to kind of get rid of some of the rolls and deviations I had in the edge. And when I mean deviations, for example, say a V-ground edge should look like this, at the very edge, that is. Now, under use, the edge will kind of sway back and forth. If it chips, that's a different story. Then you gotta resharpen. But if it rolls, or if it deviates, or if it starts losing sharpness, your edge might do a little something like this, where you can kind of see slightly it's pushed to one side. So what you would want to do is you would want to strop or something, and you would want to realign that edge to be a V-grind. So with that in mind, with my first method of 2000 grit sandpaper sharpening, I'm doing that essentially with the convex edge. Now, some of the areas that I needed to sharpen were not, how do I say it? They were not. Basically, the sandpaper would not have gotten rid of the rolls and whatnot. They were just too much for the sandpaper to handle, and way too much for a strop. So that's when, that's when I had to pull out the ceramic stone. And geometry and theory behind using that is that even though you have a convex edge that should not be used against a flat surface, you can still be tangent to your apex, and you will only hit the apex and realign that area. Now, you don't want to go crazy on using this flat surface to sharpen this, because you will start forming a V-ground edge, which is not necessarily a bad thing, because you can still sharpen your Rocksteads in a V-grind, but it's not the same signature sharpness that they send the knife to you with. So you want to maintain that as best as you can. So once you start using this V-grind to get rid of some of them deviations at the tip, you want to go right back to using your sandpaper method right away, because anything that you started making flat at the apex, say it was flat and you started rounding it out. No, this is kind of a bad drawing, but say it started getting flattened out at the apex, and the rest of it's rounded, just like you can kind of see on the knife. You want to start trying to use that sandpaper to round this out as best as you can. Now, that's why I went from 2000 grit sandpaper to the ceramic stone back to 2000 grit sandpaper, because we want to keep maintaining that edge that's convex. Now, if I would have kept going on the ceramic stone, I would have just ended up with a V-grind eventually if I kept sharpening it that way. But maintaining it on something that will promote that convex shape will maintain that signature Rockstead edge. Now, that's very important. So another thing I want to touch base on is these finishes. Now, the finish here has little to do with the sharpness of a Rockstead. The sharpness has to do with refinement, which a lot of people can do on their own. A lot of people do it on many knives, and I've done it before on this knife right here. the ZT0454, which when I sharpened this thing, it was way sharper than my Rocksteads came, because I put a lot of refinement into this mirror edge right there. It's a very sharp edge, way sharper than those Rocksteads there. And you know, I used a lot of compounds to kind of keep this thing sharp, and it has little to do with the finish on the blade, which Rockstead uses very exclusive methods to maintain their finish. But there's nothing really special about their edges. It's just all geometry and knowing what happens. Even some knives like a Mora, since those are a Scandi ground, those are ground all the way down to the edge, just like this Rockstead here, except this is convex. Some Moras, you know, anybody that has owned a Mora will tell you how sharp they come. I even owned a Enzo Borca, which is a Scandi ground folder, and that thing came sharp as ever, probably as sharp as these here, but the geometry is completely different, and the finishing is nowhere near as beautiful as this mirror polishing. So, you know, the finish itself is exclusive, but the sharpness is not. It really has nothing to do with, you know, the special methods that they use. Anybody can maintain these edges as long as you understand the geometry behind it. So that's really it. One more thing I want to touch base on is something like the sandpaper that I use, which is obviously wet dry sandpaper, which the abrasives on here are silicon carbide, which are way harder than your blade steel. And that's important to understand, because if you're using certain polishes like Bacal features, what is it, aluminum oxide, Flitz features aluminum oxide, what was the other one, Simichrome features aluminum oxide. Those, aluminum oxide and silicon carbide are way harder than your blade steel. They're way in excess of something that's 60, 67 HRC and whatnot. You can't even measure a material like silicon carbide on the HRC scale, because it just doesn't work like that. It has to be measured more on the Mohs scale. But if you were to translate it to something like, it's like these on the Rockwell C scale, HRC, it's way in excess of 70 HRC, 80 HRC. It's just way harder than your blade steel. And using those is what's going to allow you to, remove material and sharpen your knives. So that's just one other thing I want to talk about, just so, if you guys didn't understand that. So, this is just kind of common, not only is it a kind of a talk about the theory behind sharpening my Rocksteads, but it's also just, just common, reinstating some common sharpening knowledge that, kind of gets tossed around on the forum and internet and yada yada. So it's just really, really simple stuff. So anyways, I hope this was of use to some people, and hope you guys start sharpening your Rockstead yourself with good results. Enjoy.